Hello, everybody. If you are watching this, you likely just heard us talking about Starfighters Space on either a Twitter Spaces, on the timeline posting, Instagram, and you're here to learn more. My name is Gav Blacksberg, here today with Vishal, aka Stock Talk Weekly, and we're going to do a little deep dive into Starfighters and just walk through a lot of the information on the page in regards to this raise, the company, the industry, everything that you need to know to actually understand why so many people are paying attention to this and why over $20 million has already been invested by everyday people into this round. As a quick prelude to getting started, we are working with Starfighters. We're excited to be running this campaign for them. It's a paid campaign, and you should be aware of that going into it so that you understand how to receive the information, but you can go ahead and double check everything that we're saying. It's being pulled directly from their factual site as well. So hopefully this just gives some good context. So as you can see, already 62% of this raise is done and in, but let's talk about the company as a whole. Vishal, you were there with me. We went to actually visit the CEOs of the company and see the product in person at the Kennedy Space Center a few weeks ago. Talk to people a little bit about what this company is, what they do at a day-to-day level.
Yeah, no, so it's fascinating technology. We went out there to Kennedy Space Center, and they have their own little launch port over there, which is actually quite hard to get. They were talking to us a lot about how difficult it is to get the licensing to fly out of Kennedy Space Center, but they've been operating there for quite a long time. It kind of comes across as a next-gen company, but I would say to a degree, they're a legacy company as well. Their CEO has been in the aerospace and defense industry for decades. He's an expert pilot. He understands supersonic flight and hypersonic flight in a way that a lot of ordinary people probably don't. Even a lot of industry people probably don't understand it that intimately. So, what these guys are doing is something really interesting. They're repurposing a legacy technology for next gen purpose. And that legacy technology, at least what we saw, were the F-104 fighter jets. And in the video footage that we took while we were there, you can kind of see those planes flying around and see how impressive they are. We were standing by the runway and saw them whip by us, and you could barely see them. It was just a quick moment of speed. And so this showed us how impressive these aircraft are. And they, more importantly, told us what they plan to do with them. A lot of people have been, especially when it comes to the space industry, talking about this idea of satellite launches, this idea of launching payload to orbit. And as we know, the leader in that space is SpaceX. They're doing it at scale. And they've really kind of started this whole idea of reusable rockets and payload to orbit. And so what Starfighters basically said was, hey, look, not everyone's going to be able to afford to launch a rocket full of payload, especially something like Starship. These are going to be multi-billion-dollar companies that are trying to get satellite constellations up. Project Kuiper with Amazon, which we've talked about, SpaceX and Starlink, what Rocket Lab's doing. These are all launches at scale. And so Starfighters sort of realized there's a unique opportunity here where they can capture the smaller niche market underneath these large payload providers. And so they're trying to use supersonic craft, these Mach 2 craft, specifically the F-104. They're also touching on buying a new fleet of operating vehicles. They haven't yet disclosed to us what those planes are, but they're in the process of acquiring a newer fleet as well of these aircraft. So their intention is to take smaller satellites, smaller payloads, a lot of people like to call them nanosats, into orbit using these aircraft instead of setting up a full launch, setting up a rocket and launching that into orbit. So that's really their MO and the niche that they're trying to operate in. And so I would say it's a relatively new industry. In fact, it's probably the newest part of a new industry in the case where launch is in and of itself a pretty cutting edge industry. So it's pretty fascinating what they're trying to do. And I would argue they're probably the only company in the world trying to do it. So I think that puts them in an interesting position.
Yeah, exactly. They're in a area that people are familiar with, which is launching satellites into space, but they're doing it completely differently. One thing I just want to mention as we're rolling in the video here, the link to that website, and if you were interested in investing and seeing those investing terms, is going to be pinned below. We'll put it as the top comment below this video, so you can go there. And if you do want to make an investment, again, we've seen about $1 million just in the last couple of weeks come in. So there seems to be a lot of interest. You can do it there. And one of the cool things about the raise is that this is a Reg A, which means they took a lot of extra time and paperwork to make sure that everyday people who are non-accredited investors can invest, right? So you can invest as little as $712, I believe, is the minimum, versus a lot of, investments where people are looking for a 10, 20, $30,000 investment minimum. So it is pretty cool that they opened it up to people. And to what you're saying there, the big plan here is, yes, we're launching things into space, but one of the ways that they kind of compared it to me was Uber versus trucking, right? So when you have trucking, you have this giant load and it's going to be filled to the brim and it has to be taken, long distance to a specific area. And that's similar to what something like SpaceX is doing, right? You've got this heavy payload. It has to get there. It's not necessarily trying to go up tomorrow, but it's going to get there within, let's say, the next 3 months, whatever it is, versus what Starfighter is looking to do, which is that quick move of, hey, we're going to do multiple launches a day at capacity, right? We can launch within an hour and a half, whatever it is, of SpaceX launching from the base before and afterwards. We want to be getting up these nano satellites so they're sub 100 pounds regularly. If someone wants to shoot one up, they should have the opportunity to do so this week, right? Not next year. And so that's, I think, where they're trying to fit in, and then also utilizing low Earth orbit. So I think that is like a very bullish piece. When you look at the industry, why is now the time when all these space companies are starting to see, massive growth in their valuations and their operations?
I think it really all started with what SpaceX was doing in the private markets these last couple of years. People who have followed it know how quickly the valuation has swelled. It's gone from being a $50 billion company to a $350 billion company in a few years. And so, with SpaceX valuation growing, what tends to happen in industries is when the leader's valuation is growing so aggressively, you kind of see a trickle down effect where, companies that might be smaller companies or companies that might be more niche players in the industry also receive a valuation premium because of what's happening with the leader. And I think that's what's happened in space. I mean, even if you look at last year in the public markets, not the private markets, but if you look at the public markets last year, one of the leading categories, if not the leading category on a performance basis, percentage basis, was space stocks last year. You're talking about names like Redwire, Intuitive Machines. These names ran 300, 400, 500% last year. ASTS Space Mobile, that's another really popular one in the retail community. These space stocks have been on tears. And even during this correction that we've seen in the markets this year, a lot of those space stocks have held up really well compared to a lot of other stocks. And you would think, well, they're speculative stocks. Why aren't they selling off with the rest of the risk assets? Well, I think there's something to be said there. There's probably a lot of excitement around the industry. I think there's a lot of excitement from investors around the industry. And even more importantly, with this new administration coming in, we've seen a deregulation effort. Even the Starfighters crew was telling us this when we were at Kennedy Space Center with them, but that even prior to Trump coming in office, the deregulation started. And now that he's in office, a lot of deregulation is happening in this space and simplifying their ability to make these launches and to get these aircraft up and get these nanosats up. So that's a good thing for them. I think also you look at the new NASA administrator, Jerry Isaacman. He's very, very pro space. He's very, he's kind of a Voyager himself, right? He's been on SpaceX flights. And so he understands the industry really well. He's probably a more grounds-on, hands-on type of administrator. I think that's good for companies like Starfighters, smaller companies who want to get bigger quickly. I think that's really good for them. So I think the regulatory environment has improved. I think the leader's valuation in the private markets has swelled. And I think a combination of those two things has led to it being a really interesting space.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And for these guys specifically, I'm always looking to see what's the edge when you're investing in a company. And a few of the things that stand out to me here. One, you talked about the team and the background. The team just has unique access that I don't think you're going to see in other companies trying to enter this space. As you mentioned, Rick Svetkov, the CEO, has been former Navy pilot. He's been flying for 40 plus years. He's the only person in the world who has a fleet of F-104s like this. It would be next to impossible for someone else to acquire something of this size, and it sounds like now they're going to be buffing out that fleet additionally. They've also got really other loaded names. Tim, who basically is forming like a COO role, running operations. He's basically told us he was writing like legal law for how this stuff is operated in space, and he submits to NASA requests for how they're going to change things, and they take it very seriously from him. So one, for the management standpoint, I feel like they're in a really good place there, and they have a lot of connections. They also are backed by Fortuna, with Justice, and Justice Palmer has a very, very strong track record, especially in similar industries to Elon Musk. And so that's worked out really well for him. And now he's putting his money and direction behind this company. We talk about there's a big push here towards space. If people look at the chart of things being launched into space, it went from a few hundred items, a few years ago to thousands of items now, and it just seems to be escalating. So you're, in my opinion, in the right area where you're playing. There's a lot of money going to this area. There's government contracts. You have a good team. And in regards to the financials, the team's looking to be profitable by 2027 is what we were told talking with the CFO. And I think people should look into that. And of course, the big thing is that they're looking to IPO this company later this year. And so this is not the type of Reg A where people are looking to stick their money and have it locked up for years and years and years. They are going to IPO end of this year, and the only shares that are going to be available to trade really in that IPO are going to be these shares, right? And so it's going to allow people an instant access to liquidity, ideally, hopefully at a higher valuation, right, than you're investing in now. Obviously you got to look at this market, but when you look at the competitors per se, it does seem pretty promising. So I think hopefully for people, we covered this pretty well, just give you an idea of who are they, what do they do, why are we interested in this company? And of course you can look a lot more through, but there's been a lot of investments coming in. It's been really interesting to see. Stock Talk, any other final comments or thoughts on the company for someone that's going and doing their due diligence?
Yeah, I mean, I think as always, read through the presentation that we linked, and there's a lot of good information in there. There's a lot of factoids they share, and they source them as well, which is great. So you don't have to just take them at face value. They're telling you exactly where they're getting the information from. I think they even cite like Chinese Liberation Army details in there. So they're very detailed, very thorough. I think you should go and read that. But more importantly than that, I think it's important in these industries to think about where the opportunity might be, where it's not already. I think a lot of people, when they think about these space industries, they think about SpaceX is the first place everyone's mind goes. And it goes to this idea of like launching these big, beautiful rockets. And it's like sexy. There's a lot of sex appeal to it. But I think when you think hard and you think about the other opportunities that aren't being addressed, I think that's where you land at companies like Starfighters. So I think what they're doing is very, very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of risk, like there always is. With these type of new industries, but it's worth giving it a look. And I think if it's something you find interesting, especially if you're a space investor, which I know a lot of the retail traders out there today are, a lot of talk about space stocks these days, and you want to get early access to one of them, I think it's a great opportunity. So go check it out.
Perfect. Yeah. And if anybody has questions, you can drop them below the video here. We'll do our best to respond in the comments. And, if we need to make more videos diving into specific areas, happy to do that as well. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Again, check out the link below. That's going to give you a lot more information than we can cover here in 10 minutes. It's going to answer a lot of your questions, and keep tuning in as well on Spaces and other areas where we continue to host the team and have these conversations. But if you're going to do it soon, because this raise is not going to be open, in my opinion, for much longer. From what they've told me, they're looking to close it in the next month or so. So start that research process now. Talk to you all soon.
Absolutely. Take it easy, guys.